questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question without notice is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, yesterday you said that we had to have a recession to get inflation down. Given the massive increase in inflation in the December quarter, the largest quarterly increase for many years, how much worse does the recession have to get before you can get inflation down?
The Honourable Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, obviously the Deputy Leader does not understand some of the influences in the today's CPI. I said at the last press conference I had in September that this would be a much higher figure, mainly coming from the oil prices coming from the Gulf, and as well as that, there were substantial increase in government charges, in the main state government charges. The underlying rate of inflation has actually declined from 5.6% in the September quarter to 5.4% for the year to the December quarter. So the underlying rate of inflation is coming down, and that's why.
Order.
When you did an interview earlier today, people were putting numbers to you about declining inflation, mentioning 4% plus, etc. But I noticed your response was that you said what we should do. I'd like to see some greater independence for the Reserve Bank to tackle inflation. I'd like to see the government scrap the accord. In other words, that means you would prefer higher interest rates for longer. You let the Reserve Bank, without a wages policy, rip the economy to shreds. That's what that means. It can mean nothing else. Nothing else. That's what it can mean. Nothing else. And it says, then you said, I think these wage tax deals have clearly failed. Then we had Senator Short say, the government's attempt to con the electorate about lower inflation, con the electorate with declining inflation. The OECD area inflation rate is now running at, from memory, 7.4%. 7.4. We got the UK at 9.9 and rising, the United States at 6.2 and rising. We're coming down, and our underlying rate is just about half that of Britain, and we're conning the electorate. And then he goes on to say, and their highly political wage tax trade-offs were nothing more than misleading opportunistic stunts. That is, in this quarter we are living in, there will be no wage increases as a result of the wage tax deal which the government concluded around the 0.7 for the September quarter. No wage increase, yet this is a stunt in the national inflation outcome. I mean, what's wrong with you fellows? Don't you have any idea? No, but what you prefer to do, you don't want the ACTU. You don't want the ACTU there saying, well, all right, we'll trade off wages for a tax cut. You'd prefer to be seeing the 0.7 coming through, and before that the previous quarter's inflation rate in the numbers now, which would have seen today's figure well over 3%, but your remedy was to give the Reserve Bank the right to tackle inflation. That is, how could it tackle inflation if it's a monetary authority other than higher interest rates for longer? And yet you're up there saying interest rates ought to be lower and the recession shouldn't be here. And yet you say, you've got the gall to be saying the Reserve Bank should take on and tackle inflation. See, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, you see, the duplicity of the opposition on this issue is unbelievable. We had the Leader of the Opposition in February 1990, when this government reduced interest rates. They've been up all week talking about the recession. When this government reduced interest rates in January 1990, this is what the Leader of the Opposition had to say in February. Why the sudden urgency? Why the sudden urgency of a reduction in rates in February 1990? He said, Australians will know that policy is again being manipulated to political ends. That is, we've reduced interest rates in January 1990 for political ends. If interest rates can be put down with no justification prior to the election, they will just as easily be put up again after it. They were not put down without justification prior to the election. They were put down 13 months ago because we needed then to take rates off in the economic interest of this country, and we did not just put them up, as you stated, just after the election. Not just, and then you had to say, that's one thing, then you had to say on the 15th of February, The announcement today that the Reserve Bank will further ease monetary policy to achieve a further modest reduction in official interest rates is another blatant political act. So here you're now saying we shouldn't be in a recession, but you oppose the rate reductions which were engineered to avoid it. You oppose them, and you go on to say, that it begs the question really as to whether it is a political decision. Indeed, I think it begs the question whether there isn't a deal lurking behind this. And then you said on the 23rd of January, on the day I actually announced a reduction in interest rates from the high levels of interest rates 13 months ago, you said today's move to begin lowering them is a pre-election ploy. In other words, you resisted every reduction in interest rates, which you now say should have been earlier, to avoid the recession. But at the time, you put these appalling political statements out. Mr Keating is pushing the pace of interest rate reductions simply to suit his electoral time. No, I'm blaming you for being a fraud, for being fraudulent, for being a fraud, for being duplicitous, for up there in one statement after another blackguarding the government for reducing interest rates in January and February 1990 as political stunts, when today you say we shouldn't have a recession, rates should have been eased earlier. And when they were first eased, you said they were political stunts. And then today you've got your deputy up saying it ought to be all given to the Reserve Bank to leave interest rates up higher for longer, because only the Reserve Bank and no wage tax deal should reduce inflation. The fact is you don't have credibility on this issue. And that's why all the people out there,
the member for Gippsland will cease interjecting.
Australian business know you have no anti-inflation strategy. And you know that you would never have committed your name to a monetary policy of the strength and integrity we committed ourselves to. You wouldn't have released the rates after the election. And when you said in that press statement you expect rates to rise after the election, they've only fallen by 5 percentage points after the election. So how credible are you? And then the Leader of the Opposition had this to say about inflation. In February 1990, Australia will be looking down the barrel of double-digit inflation by the end of 1990. Well, the end of 1990, the rate is 6.9%, not double-digit inflation. In other words, how credible are you? You work on the basis that some doorstop has never followed up, that nothing you say is ever checked or repeated. But what you're doing is cavilling at interest rate reductions as political stunts, suggesting that interest rates were going to go up after the election. In fact, they went down by 5 percentage points. And then saying we're going to have double-digit inflation by the end of 1990. Professor, God help your students. God help it when your students start wreaking their economic havoc on the rest of us, if that's the best you could do. If that's the best you could do. So the fact of the matter is, well, I obviously learned them better than the rest of you. And as for this simplistic nonsense, that the reason that we ought to have lower inflation now and can have it by letting the Reserve Bank leave interest rates higher for longer, all that is duplicitous rubbish. If you believe in flattening the place, burning it to pieces, then say so. And don't try and hide behind code words like I'd like to see greater independence of the Reserve Bank. Do you think the Reserve Bank didn't comply on all the increases in interest rates? Of course it did. And didn't comply on the reductions? Of course it did. But what you would have done was left the rates up and burned the place to a cinder. Burned it to a cinder. And that's why you have no credibility. And that's why you'll stay there after the next poll.
Members on my left will cease interjecting.